Police in Owasso, Oklahoma are investigating after a 16-year-old school student died following a fight on campus. According to The Independent, Nex Benedict, who identified as non-binary, got into a fight with 3 girls in the school restroom. School officials say that they were all in the restroom for less than 2 minutes. Students broke up the fight along with a staff member that was supervising from outside the door. After each student walked themselves to the nurse's office, no ambulance was called, but out of an abundance of caution, Nex was taken to the hospital by a parent and was later discharged. The next morning, Nex collapsed in the family's living room and died later in the hospital. So some important details to mention is that Nex was in the restroom with a friend of theirs who was also trans. And they also had a history of being bullied at the school. They said since like last year, I believe, 2013. And also, this all comes on the heels of Oklahoma's governor signing some legislation that requires public school students to use the restrooms that that match the gender they're assigned, the sex they're assigned at birth. So just that legislation alone, I was like, this is one of the prime examples. Not to say that the fight, we don't know what caused the fight, but this is an example of what could happen when you don't let trans people go into the restrooms they need to go into, or the spaces they need to go into, and force them to do something that they might be uncomfortable with. And
this is truly very sad, and it didn't have to happen. And I think the story's still developing. We're still getting details on it, so there's a lot missing. But I think, like when you mentioned the bathroom bill that was passed, like that probably would have saved their life had they been able to go into the bathroom that they felt comfortable with going to.
Right.
And I think the legislation, we talked about it all last year, how this legislation, this anti-LGBTQ legislation, is going to continue harming our community. And unfortunately, we see that in this case with this child.
Right.
And what I was reading, like even the teachers there at the school didn't call the ambulance. So they didn't even have like a sense of urgency for that. So to me, that tells me there's also probably some bias there also.
Totally.
So it's just it's disgusting. It's very sad.
That was also something that came to my mind, how you mentioned that the school hadn't called an ambulance. And also it's interesting to me that the school had someone just outside of the door instead of going into the actual place where the incident is taking place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they had rules against that or what was going on. That was odd to me too, but I also think that this is why it's important to make sure you have that kind of infrastructure in place in schools for queer students to go and maybe feel comfortable. Because like you said, no teachers, no faculty, no staff, no one thought
Sense of urgency.
I should call an ambulance. And like the mom spoke out to The Independent and said that they had been dealing with bullying for over a year now because they were transgender, like specifically because of that. So I feel like there has been motions to like ban pride flags from classrooms and that. I'm like, that's why it's so important, so students know that they have a safe space, someone they can talk to, so maybe this thing could have been avoided.
Totally.
That teacher maybe could have seen what was going on, like, oh, I know why this happened. Let me make sure that this student is taken care of, because we don't know if any of the other teachers or students really care to.
Yeah, and this is like, again, just a prime example that, you know, trans youth is being targeted.
Yeah.
And we talked just last week about DEI initiatives that are being taken down. Like, like you said, how far can education go? And I think my answer and all of our answers is very far. My guess is that wasn't the case in that school, unfortunately.